Have you ever come across a poem that talks about love, about life, about celebrating the moment, only to realize that it was written during one of the most turbulent times in British history? Well, that's the irony of the Cavalier Poets, the poets of elegance writing during the age of turbulence. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to dive into one of the most scoring yet overlooked parts of English literature, which is the Cavalier Poets, also called as the Cavalier Poets. You might see these names and their works in the previous year question papers of UGC-NET English, wherein they must have appeared in the British literature chronology-based questions, or match the following questions, or even the theme-based normal questions. So, in today's video, I'm going to walk you through who these Cavalier poets were, what did they write, how did they differ from the metaphysical poets who also wrote during that point of time, and why they matter. So, stay tuned till the end of this video and don't forget to make notes. So, let us first understand the time during which these poets were writing. These Cavalier poets were writing during the Caroline period, one of the most interesting periods in British history that lasted from 1625 to 1649, marking the reign of King Charles I. Now, you might have this question that why is this period called as the Caroline period when you have Elizabethan period after Elizabeth I, Victorian period after Queen Victoria? Then why is this period called as the Caroline period? Now the answer behind this is pretty simple. The term comes from Carolus, which is a Latin name for Charles, and that is why it is called as the Caroline period, marking the reign of Charles I from 1625 to 1649. So the Caroline period is considered to be one of the most turbulent periods in British history. There was growing social, religious and political conflicts happening during that point of time between two parties. Who are those two parties? The first ones were the supporters of the king, the supporters of the crown. And the second one were basically the parliamentarians, the supporters of the government who wanted the government to rule. And these two parties are the present day Whigs and Tories in UK. Right? Now going back to the 17th century, the ones who were supporting Charles I, the ones who were supporting the king, were also called as royalists. And can you guess what could be their other name? It was the Cavaliers. Right. So basically, the Cavalier poets or the Cavalier poets were the poets writing in favor of the king. So their poetry sort of reflected that loyalty. It was graceful, it was witty, it was full of courtly charm, and it sort of reflected that elitism, right? But the content matter was more about love, life, being in the moment, seizing the day and all of those kind of things, which the other poets during that point of time saw to be coming from a very privileged place, right? Speaking about the kind of literature that was produced during this point of time, specifically the kind of poetry, it was not just the royalists writing in favor of King Charles I. There were specifically three kinds of poetic schools that were prominent during the 17th century. So what were these poetic schools? The first school was a metaphysical school of poetry, which was pioneered by poets like John Donne, who talked about really intense spiritual issues in a very complex manner. If you want to know more about the metaphysical school of poetry, who were the main poets, what were their works, and why it is so significant from UGC-NET perspective, then you can check out my full-length video on metaphysical poetry, whose link I've attached in the description box below. The second school of poets are largely called as the Puritan poets, who came into limelight during the Puritan period or the interregnum from 1649 till the Restoration period, that is 1650. Now this short period, you see the role of Oliver Cromwell, right? You see that the kind of rule that was established by Oliver Cromwell, where people, they observed that kind of restraint, not just in their social behavior, but also the poets, they sort of refrained from using any kind of poetic language or figurative language even in their poems. They did not use a lot of metaphors. The best example that I can give you right now is of John Milton and his work Paradise Lost. And then finally, coming to the last school of poetry that we are going to discuss in detail in this video is Cavalier Poetry or Caroline Poetry, right? Now, as we have discussed before as well, Cavalier poets were basically a group of writers from the 17th century in England. They are generally defined by their class and the kind of light-hearted poetry that they wrote. The main idea over here is they were looked down during that point of time because they wrote poetry that only interested King Charles I during that point of time, and they often worked in his service. Having said that, now let's move on and discuss the major themes and poetic style of Caroline poetry. When we are talking about the themes and the style of Caroline poetry, you need to understand that they were quite unabashed in talking about love and beauty, right? And they often celebrated both kinds of love, both romantic as well as platonic. And they sort of talked about the beauty of women, portraying them to be flawless, perfect, idealized, and almost goddess-like. Secondly, they talked about courtly life and pleasure. Since they were writing for King Charles I, they were talking about his service and all of those things. They were also exploring the themes of aristocracy and court, right? Enjoying life's pleasures, achieving that social status, right? Talking again from a place of privilege. And obviously, they were writing in support of King Charles I. So definitely they glamorized king's rule. They talked about the political events, but also represented in a manner that sort of like favored the image of King Charles I. But out of all of these themes, one of the most important theme of Caroline poetry is carpe diem. Carpe diem basically means seize the day, to live your life to the fullest, to enjoy your every day as if it's your last. Right? So the idea of making the most out of your present moment, not thinking about your past, not thinking about your future, often associated with the ideas of living your life in your own terms, living your life with pleasure, right? Not taking any kind of stress and just being in the moment. That was the central theme of the Caroline poets. Now, let's talk about the key Caroline poets that you need to remember for your UGC-NET English exam. The first one is the most important and the most popular one, and that is Robert Herrick. Robert Herrick is popularly known for his poem "To the Virgins Make Much of Time." It beautifully captures the carpe diem spirit in his poem. It has one of the most famous lines, which are, "Gather your rosebuds while you may." It talks about living a life to the fullest before your youth fades away. Almost hedonistic, and also like has hints and echoes of the aesthetic movement in literature. Apart from that, he is also known for his another famous poem, which is Corinna's Going a Maying. In this particular poem, he sort of like combines playful, earthy imagery with themes of innocence, right? All of these again correlating with the, all the central themes of Caroline poetry. The second most important Caroline poet that you need to remember is Richard Lovelace. Lovelace is popularly known for his poem To Althea from Prison, wherein he sort of challenges the conventional notions that we have about freedom. So, what is freedom? How do we define freedom? Lovelace has presented the true notions of a freedom, and he believes that freedom actually lies within our minds. True freedom lies within our minds, and that is beautifully captured from the line, "Stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage." Something that is quite revolutionary, don't you think? how we sort of feel that freedom lies in being alone, that freedom lies in making our own choices. But more often than not, even when we think we are free, we are actually caged within our minds, right? We are shackled by our own thoughts, by our own beliefs, right? And we do something that we actually don't want to do, but we sort of like have to do, right? So this poem captures those feelings, those emotions beautifully. His poetry celebrates the ideas of loyalty, about personal honor, about having that unbreakable, unstoppable spirit, right? Even under oppression. His another popular poem is Lucasta Going to Wars, which again beautifully captures this dilemma that a lot of soldiers face between choosing love and duty, right? Again, a very important poem for UGC-NET exam. And then the next important Caroline poet is Thomas Carew. Thomas Carew is popularly known for poems like A Rapture, The Spring, To My Mistress in Absence, wherein he again masterfully blends sensual themes with a bit more elegance, a bit more refined and polished language. In comparison to his other contemporaries, in comparison to other Cavalier poets, Thomas Carew is more refined, right? He sort of used a bit more graceful language, talked a bit more about the courtly tradition, right, while exploring deep emotional intimacy. And then finally, the last and the most important Cavalier poet that you need to remember for your UGC-NET exam is Sir John Suckling. Sir John Suckling's tone of writing poetry was a bit witty, was a bit light-hearted, right? You can see that in poems like Why So Pale and Van Fond Lover, right? In which he has filled it with playful irony, sort of poking fun at the melodrama of love instead of taking it very seriously. His casual and humorous tone has made his poetry very distinct from other Caroline poets or from other Caroline poems, right? It has made it distinctly charming and easy to relate to even today. So if I have to differentiate between the Cavalier poets and the metaphysical poets, here's what I would look at. The tone of the Cavalier poets is light, elegant, courtly, whereas the metaphysical poets use a very intense, intellectual and abstract tone. The themes that Cavalier poets deal with are love, beauty, loyalty, whereas metaphysical poets talk a lot about religion, philosophy, death. The language of the Cavalier poets is simple, it's musical even, whereas the metaphysical poets, they use a very complex language which is filled with conceits. What are conceits? To know that, you need to watch the full-length video on metaphysical poetry, whose link I've attached in the description box below. So that's it for today's video on Caroline poetry. Light, loyal and loaded with potential UGC-NET English questions. If you have any doubts, queries or anything to mention, you can write down in the comments section below and I'll be very happy to help you. Thank you so much for watching till the end. I'll see you in the next one.